Linahan, and I am here as a mother against the bill.
And are you representing yourself or another organization?
Representing myself, but I am the Vice President of Women on the Wall.
Okay, and you're testifying on their behalf as well.
Yes.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Okay, thanks. There has been a clear shift in education away from academics to the behavioral. And for an example, my oldest son, how he was taught math is completely different than how my younger son was taught math by the exact same teacher because of the math standards that were put in place in 2012. So it's not by happenstance that we have this huge uptick in mental health issues. My youngest son went from loving school, loving math, to crying every night and hating math. I took him out. I'm a homeschool mother now. It breaks my heart. I love homeschooling him, but it breaks my heart because he's not a part of the community. We live in a great school district. On paper, we look amazing. But I know that what's going on inside of those classrooms, mandated by the state on our teachers who are evaluated by these new standards, the college and career readiness standards, have had a direct impact on my own children. And so if we're going to talk about these issues, we've got to talk about the root cause, because just bringing in mental health experts, this session, mental health is all the rage. And yes, we have an uptick in suicides. We have an uptick in teachers leaving the classroom. But let's talk about why that actually is. And let's look at the standards that have shifted away from academics, reading, writing, math, and history, to the behavioral and what that is actually doing to our children. And these issues aren't mental issues in our children. It's actually what the teachers are being forced to teach in the classroom.
Thank you, Ms. Linahan. Chairman Coleman, I think you have a question too.
Yes, thank you, Ms. I'm one of those folks that I don't think that we should turn our schools into mental health providers, but I do know that we should have, where it's needed, and for both children and families, that should, if they have no other place to go, that is available to those children and families, just like if we had a school health clinic doing that.
And kids need help.
Right. So,
I see that. But the challenge is this shift to merge.
I was going to come around to that.
Yeah, to merge education and mental health, in fact, likely will do more harm, because as was testified on another bill, when you medicalize or bring in the mental health, currently the solution is medication. And in Columbine, medication is the problem.
One of the things you testified to in your own family was you said it was the mandate of an educational side, not the mental health side, that created challenges in your house. So what was so that's what I'm trying to say. It had nothing to do with behavioral health. It had to do with the change in curriculum.
Right. And so if we look at why is there this huge uptick in, actually it's across the country, but specifically in Texas, what has happened since 2009 in education? We've implemented the college and career readiness Common Core aligned standards, and if you look at those standards that are coming from the federal government because of ESSA, those standards are behavioral, they're not academic. And what did we have before? And if you think about it, what makes a kid not have mental health issues?
So the difficulty is you have to separate those two things in terms of teaching subject matter, and that's what's really important. That's what everyone wants to change. Matter of fact, that's what this session we're working on in terms of school finance. But on the mental health side, it's because we saw an increase in suicides and in those circumstances. Whoa. I passed the bill to train providers, the staff and personnel to be able to identify those things and then refer it to parents so parents could do something. But what I would really like to see is there truly a causality between the change in curriculum standards. Now I can see the test. Everybody knows the test drive kid, to drive all of us to drink. I don't drink. but
I'm with you.
So, and I know that type of and that's been around since 1995 here in Texas. So I think, in this, what's good about the bill, the fact that there's an evaluation of what is occurring and how to do it better, and so what those best practices are. I think it's just really important to stop from happening, which you say is proliferating.
Right, but the challenge is that the solution is mental health services and bringing together a mental health coalition. You're not addressing the root cause.
So maybe we could figure out that is the root cause, because I say the testing is the root cause. Now I'll say that.
And I agree with you.
But that's why I'm laying that out. I don't know about the core curriculum. So I'm only saying that's why we need to do these things, to see what the root cause of these challenges happen to be in the schools and with our kids. I know this is no disrespect. It's the idea of the rigor that's requested out of kids now. It's like you go into law school in middle school, and also whether or not we can wrap our arms around the kids and know that they can talk to the people that are there. It's not just it's about referral, getting the parents to know that, hey, we see something.
But don't we already have those systems in place?
No.
Child Find, we have.
No, we don't.
Programs.
No, we don't. I'm telling you, until we did the evaluation bill in 2011, no, it didn't exist. And if you look at, in terms of the school counselors and the discussion of that, part of the bill I had last session was identify which schools did have school counselors or not. And again, I know people don't like that. The governor vetoed the bill. So, he said that's not the core academic purpose of public schools. Well, like I said, tell that to the kids that my wife is tutoring, and the fact that they would be better sometimes, that's the only place. And so I'm only saying this to say, yes, I agree, people do whatever they do. I don't believe that schools are the answer to all of our problems, but every family is not the same and doesn't have the same ability to deal with certain circumstances. So I respect your opinion, because I agree, because when I did that bill, it was very important that the treatment wasn't at the school, but that the child was referred, the principal referred, and the counselors referred, talk to the parents and ask them to come in and work on whatever it was. So I think it's really important. So you see what you're talking about. The correlation between the core, whatever advanced core curriculum. That's all, Madam Chair.
Representative Zephyr?
Let me ask you this. You basically, to go back to, you said there was a change in math standards in 2012, and it was geared more towards behavioral and not academic. Could you give me like an example or something like that I could understand?
Well, I'll tell you the math standards,
right.
the standards that are in Texas, and you guys passed a law, we're not supposed to have Common Core in Texas, but when Texas applied for the waiver from the federal government for ESSA, in that document it said that we're aligned, I think it was 94% to Common Core. So we're Common Core. We just call it college and career readiness. And the math standards, Dr. Jim Milgram testified in front of the State Board of Education and said, in fact, the Texas math standards that came in place were worse than Common Core, and children who are in this type of math for more than 4 years will likely never recover. There has been testimony in front of the state board over and over by a father from Leander ISD who's actually taken all of the math STAR tests and has written reports, and I can get that for you and send it to all of you, where it says that the assessments, the STAR is not testing math, it's testing the process. And those processes, when you have a child who is in 2nd grade, and we all were learning, addition and subtraction and multiplication, when you have 2nd graders who are being forced to think abstractly, the front part of their brain is not developed yet. It's not developmentally appropriate. That's what we are implementing here in Texas. That's why you have kids. Some kids have real issues. I'm not saying that they don't have real issues. Other kids, their mental issues are being caused by the confusion in the math. My youngest son, his teacher was teaching the old way, and then there was another teacher coming in and teaching the new way. My child was confused. And that's what we're doing. We've got to look at the solution's not just medical. The solution is to look at the standards. And to your point about the tests causing a problem, they are. But be careful, because the next generation of assessments and accountability Commission, the number 1 item on that report, what's going to come in to replace the STAR, the number 1 is online adaptive assessments and instruction. I encourage you to look up Dr. Peg Luxick and find out what adaptive assessments are really all about, because that takes away all control, and whoever's writing those assessments and instruction is going to have complete control over those children. And the behavioral interventions are very scary. So there's things that are coming.
Is this just have to do with math, or do we find this in other pieces of curriculum?
It's in all kinds of curriculum.
Okay, could you give me another example of behavioral versus academic?
I can. And a lot of the stuff that's coming in is online, and it's not like a curriculum, it's not like a SBOE approved textbook. For instance, my daughter was taking an English 3 class. They were talking about philosophy in her class. She was sent online to do a quiz. This quiz was 30 questions, and it asked things like, do you believe homosexuality is natural or unnatural? Do you believe in an almighty and loving God? Agree or disagree? Do you believe children should be protected at all costs? Do you agree or disagree? It asked all these questions, and then this website created a tension score, and where there was a tension in your answers, it created a report. So my daughter's report said, you said that you believe in almighty and loving God, but you also said that you believe children should be protected at all costs. If there was an almighty and loving God, He would protect children, and there's natural disasters all the time. My daughter took screenshots Teacher told her to take the quiz on her cell phone. She took screenshots. I was horrified when I saw that. So I went to the teacher and said, "What is this? How can you even think that this is okay?" And she said, "My job is to teach your child to critically think in the workforce." Now, these are high school kids. I talked to my daughter and her friends afterwards. What they were saying is, after taking that quiz, they really felt bad about themselves. So we need to understand that all of what's being mandated on our teachers to teach all this social emotional learning, behavioral learning, our kids shouldn't be forced to cover topics that us as adults can't even agree on. That's what we're putting on our kids. That's why they're having the troubles that they're having.
So that in other words, it's the social, emotional, or behavioral versus that's the common core element.
Mm-hmm. And you guys are in a really between a rock and a hard place, because you take federal dollars, and when you take federal dollars, you've got to align your education system to the mandates of the Every Student Succeeds Act. And that's what the mandates are, a shift away from academics to the behavioral.
Thank you, Ms. Linahan. Members, any other questions for Ms. Linahan? Thank you, Ms. Linahan.
Again, my name is Alice Linahan, and I am against the bill. A view from the classroom of today would astound onlookers that mental health and social, emotional, and behavioral interventions have replaced academics. With these wraparound mental health services and interventions into personalities, values, beliefs, and dispositions at school, teachers are expected and forced to monitor and collect behavioral data on our children that has nothing to do with education. Data is collected, logged into state longitudinal data systems, shared, and ultimately exposes our children to surveillance capitalism. This personal data is freely given and used by outside contractors, foundations, and businesses to create software, curricula, activities, and programs that delve into changing the personal qualities of our children, their families, according to government set objectives and outcomes. And I gave you all a longer letter. I won't sit and read the whole thing.
We appreciate you not doing that. Thank you.
Yes, but there are some real violations that we believe not only this bill does, but ESSA that is being mandated on you from the federal government.
Mrs. Linahan, we're going to stick with House Bill before us, please.
Right,
Thank
but
you.
because this bill implements ESSA, and I'll just read through a couple of these, the violations of the medicalization of our schools. One is the data collection. Number 2, data trafficking, and we've already experienced that here in Texas with SpedX, a no-bid contract where student data was given to a third-party contractor, and that data still has not been accounted for, even though the contract with SpedX has been done away with. The treatment, interventions, and psychological social emotional learning that's being done, this character training, is actually a violation. It's being done in the classroom.
Mrs. Linahan, is that a part of House Bill 18 that you're talking about?
Yes, according to the
what
other.
page are you on and what line of the bill?
I'm not looking at the bill, I'm looking at my
Someone give her
testimony.
a copy of the bill so we can follow you.
Okay, well, what
Now,
I'm
we want you to
saying,
point it out so we can follow you, because we like to follow you on this bill.
okay,
You say
what you were
you're speaking
saying,
about the bill.
earlier testimony and what
We only on House Bill
Representative
18.
Forbright.
We only on House Bill 18. Our
Correct.
record is on House Bill 18. We are recording this testimony on
Yes,
House
ma'am.
Bill 18. And I don't want to trip you up,
according
and I don't
to
do trip
what
evidence up there.
Representative Price stated before, and what I've heard testified, the people who are for this bill, the interventions, the social emotional learning, the mental health interventions that are being done, I'm not talking about acute mental health, I'm talking about just the social emotional character interventions, that is being done without parental consent. When you shift away from academics to the behavioral and character training, who decides that? As a parent, that's my role. Attitudes, values, beliefs, and behaviors are the right of the parents. And if you are putting in place programs, best practices for social emotional learning, you're violating my parental consent. So that's why we're against the bill. And because the statewide longitudinal database system is collecting this data, and because the FERPA law was gutted basically in 2012 to say that our children's data can be collected without consent in the name of research, and then they passed WIOA, which impacts this bill because you've got federal dollars coming in through Health and Human Services, through different agencies, and then in 2019, the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act was passed, which makes legal the interoperability of all of these agency databases. So if my child is seen as having emotional issues, and that is put on their record, that will follow them for the rest of their lives. That's not the role. I don't send my children to school. I didn't send my children to school to be psychologically analyzed and to be tracked by the state or the federal government for workforce purposes, for whatever. So we're diving into an area that will have implications on our children for the rest of their lives.
Thank you, ma'am. Chairman Frank.
Yeah, for Mr. Spiller,
Yes, sir.
You mentioned the mental health screenings, because I think, I'm trying to figure out where in the bill.
It's not specifically in the bill, and I'm
Right,
sorry if
mental-
that misled you. Obviously, we're headed into integrating more services in, but it is not in this.
Right, I think in the future, and I think that I think you are right, and I am concerned with where we're heading on the mental health stuff. I make no secret about that. I think it's important that we address issues, but I also think it matters how we do it a lot. But I just also want to make sure, sometimes we're talking about what's actually in the bill, sometimes we're talking about other stuff that has nothing to do with the bill. Sometimes they are interconnected.
Yeah, I slid off of that.
No, that's all right. That's all right. I just want to make sure, because I think Chairman Price rightfully said that requires parental consent.
Correct.
I think the flip side is, there was a very good point made, and I don't want to, it's not really a question, more of a comment, but I think I understood a little bit. When we start training on certain things that are not academic, you are stepping into you're not doing academics now, you're doing mental health. You're not getting permission because you're not doing a screening.
Correct.
But if by definition you turn it and you all of a sudden start talking about, and the last thing, and she'll stop me if I'm going too much, I also, from the testimony, I am concerned. There's a huge industry in this, and we are kidding ourselves and that's not really in the bill, but we're kidding ourselves that that's not part of the issue, that we all need to be careful as we delve into it.
Right.
So,
Well, and I could give you an example with mental health first aid, since it has a questioning component. You've already decided that you think maybe a child has a problem. The proper thing to do, in my opinion, would be to trigger child find, get mom and dad involved, and let them consent or withhold consent to any question or screening. And so that caused actually a bit of heartburn when it came to figuring out how were we going to do mental health first aid in schools, right? There was some back and forth on that.
Well, and I think one of the great challenges I think we have in schools is because schools tend to have the most problem with the most problematic kids, which tend to be from the worst parents. There's a bias to think that all parents are bad, right? Because that's what you're having to spend your time on. I don't know how to get that.
Could you even judge
disconnect fixed.
a parent? You know, I mean, kids have problems sometimes. It's,
Chairman
you know, it's
Conley?
human nature. Yes, sir.
So if there was never intent for anything to happen when I put mental health first aid in the law, and it was to inform the people in the school of how to recognize the circumstances that were going. As a matter of fact, in the original law, it was anything that had, and then that referral goes immediately to the principal. There's not somebody in there doing mental health first aid. It goes immediately to the principal to get to or whoever it is, to get to the parents with parental consent.
When Janet Paleo was going over mental health first aid with me, what I saw was a questioning component. And in the rulemaking process, that was one of those things that was hard to sort out, and that was what I was testifying.
Well, and I understand.
And I
But
think-
come see me, because I did that.
Oh, I know you did.
Yeah, so come
And you
see
were
me.
careful to put parental rights.
I was very
parental
careful.
consent in a number of
But
places.
I'm trying
my
to be-
testimony was, can we amp that up? Right? Can we further refine parental consent? Because there are a lot of initiatives coming in.
Well,
And perhaps this bill would be a vehicle to do
the
that.
only thing I would say is, yes, I was very careful.
Yep.
I got good advice from different people. I feel very good about the basis for this jumped off of that. But at the same time, I think that none of this is designed to usurp parental rights.
Of course not. I don't think any of us intend to do anything wrong. The problem is when it gets on the ground, it gets used different ways.
I understand you and I've been sparring for
Oh,
20
yeah.
years.
You bet.
So I'm just being quiet. Well, I'm not being quiet now.
This is a good dialogue, and I think it's a constructive
No, it's a good
dialogue.
it's a good dialogue, but you know how I can be.
Is that not?
Senator.
Dr. Zebler?
Tiffany, right? Alyssa, I'm sorry. So when you put it on the ground, though, can you give me a few specifics as to really what y'all would be doing? You know, if you implement the plan, what exactly? Could you give me a few specifics of exactly what you'd be doing?
What do you mean, the plan
Oops,
under
sorry.
this bill? The plan under this bill?
Right.
Or,
Let's Chairman Price ask.
Okay.
yeah, that
Fine.
seems, that's kind of where,
I think
Chairman
with
Price
the
has gone
problem,
into
the
that
problem
before.
we were just discussing, we could easily slide off into based on the way that question was phrased, Representative, because there's no plan that a third party would then implement on behalf of the school. In fact, it provides that it would be available to schools, and not just one plan, any plan, basically. I mean, it's basically saying mental health first aid, for instance, is a program that educators can take, that if they do take, and they take in person, for instance, they will get more credit. It's an inducement so that they will become more aware of what to look for, or maybe just be more educated about circumstances that may allow them to be supportive to a student who may be suffering a condition that requires care. And so there's no mandate in this bill that's saying the school has to train teachers a certain way. It does require that if they teach health, they also include in that curriculum a mental health component. So it doesn't require it. It just says if you're going to teach health, don't just teach cardiovascular disease and nutrition. Teach, include in that what maybe self-harming looks like, or depression, or just some other mental health conditions that could be useful in understanding those conditions. So it's not there is no, I kind of cringe at the word plan, because there's no one thing in the bill that has to be done. It's more of a framework that then would allow educators and administrators, principals, whomever, to be better trained and aware, The goal is to reduce the stigma so that folks can discuss mental health. I mean, I think if we stick our head in the sand and just say we don't have mental health conditions, you know, that's not a good option. That's not appropriate. I think we have to be able to understand, you know, that it is something that exists. I mean, people were afraid to talk about it for years and years. Now, the boogeyman is, you know, in the education world, if you start talking about mental health, there is, I mean, I'm not going to say it's all good because it's not. There's certainly really good examples of where it can be overblown or overdone. And we've been really careful not to go there. But I think on the flip side, you talk public health with people and you bring in the education world, those two don't speak the same language. And so I do think that you know, you have to be very careful when you're talking about any sort of, you know, healthcare and you're talking about education. And so what we're trying to do, again, not a plan that some third party is going to hoist upon a school or a campus or a district, but let's create a framework within which the educators can be better trained, more aware, that the curriculum requires districts to be including in plans they already have to prepare some sort of components that at least recognize and address mental health with regard to what they're going to do. And it always includes parental involvement. In fact, I was just reading back through the bill, and that is something that it requires attention to. Now, parental involvement can mean different things to different people, but I think that's a tremendously important area. I mean, I'm a parent of 4 kids who have gone through school, and, you know, I think it's different today. I mean, that's a hard thing because I'm not sure that involvement is as good as it used to be. But I just want to make sure, and I want, you know, the witness to answer your question, but I just don't want it framed as what kind of plan somebody's going to do, because that's not really what the bill's all about.
Okay, but
that's exactly where I would go with it. Like, this is a framework that when I mentioned the behavioral plan from the Center for School-Based Mental Health, it wasn't a specific, this is exactly what you do. It's what components do you look at to make a successful plan. And so some of that I was talking about that's in the written is just school buy-in. Like, do you have administrators and leadership invested in whatever you're going to do? Do you have teachers invested? Are you collaborating with communities? So it's a very broad framework, but it's the kind of things that you keep in mind as you're developing a school-based mental health program. And so what I was saying is that kind of broad, like, best practices around using a framework are things that we were seeing in this bill. Not specific practices on the ground, because, Chair Price framed it best. You know, it's really about creating a framework that would be helpful for schools to make these decisions on their own, while at the same time kind of looking at what evidence is out there.
okay, but all right.
Well, and just to be the devil's advocate, that curriculum, or where that curriculum comes from, matters.
Right.
And it matters in the shacks currently are having a really hard time with all of the sex education programs because there's this controversy. And that's a different thing. That's a different thing.
I created the shacks.
No, I'm not saying the
No,
shacks
this is
are
why it's
bad.
really important.
I'm not saying the shacks are bad. What I'm saying is that
But
curriculum.
It gives.
Well, but there are nonprofit organizations with agendas that have overtaken the shack. As a mother who's fought the sex education battle, I know what's going on in the shacks. And so when you bring in mental health issues and curriculum, then there are issues. Let's say that shack brings it in. Let's say you have a health class where now this curriculum comes in that talks about suicide prevention, all of these things, but where that curriculum is coming from dives into other areas, the LGBT if that's causing suicide. There's stuff that's coming in. When you shift to attitudes, values, beliefs, and behaviors, this is about behaviors, it becomes whose attitudes, values, beliefs, and behaviors, and that means anyone with an agenda, whether it's an agenda I agree with or not, doesn't matter. It's a matter of any agenda has access to our children, and me as a mother who sends my child to that school, if I'm not on that shack, but my child is required to take health in order to graduate, I don't have an opportunity to opt out of that, just like.
And you think you should?
And I think I
Excuse
should.
me, Dr. Zeller, do you want to ask a question?
Well, no, the last thing I wanted to ask, so once you, let's say you
Dr.
find it.
Zeller, do you want to ask a question?
Yes.
And I recognize you.
Once you find out that we say, okay, we've identified a problem, what are you told to do with it under the program?
You know we're recording our testimony. I want to keep a clean record. You're laughing, but I'm serious.
Well, yeah, so what are you told to do with it under the plan?
Madam
The
Chair.
framework.
What? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, the reason why we want to keep the point, somebody go back and
Right,
listen to
I
these
understand.
tapes.
So,
Okay, Chairman Price want to give you an answer to your question.
thank you.
Chairman Price.
I think the most important point I can say about the bill is it doesn't require anybody to teach any one thing or do anything. I understand Ms. Linahan's concern, and I think that's a valid concern with regard to what third-party curriculum is a district or a state, for instance, going to adopt. And we don't get into that in this bill. We just basically say, look, we recognize the fact that, for instance, if you are teaching health and you're teaching about cardiovascular disease, which I think we all agree would be something worthwhile to teach our kids in the health class, we might also include suicide prevention. Let's at least acknowledge that health as a curriculum includes more than, you know, bruised knees or cardiovascular disease or obesity. It includes the brain. And so that could be concussion health. It can be all kinds, brain health. It can be all kinds of things. We don't get into that in the bill. We do not say that has to be taught. What we do say is that if you're going to teach health, and we don't require it any more than it's already required, we say if you're doing it, then do it more holistically. Let's talk about health care. Let's just not talk about only physical health. Now, whether a district or a state, you know, decides to engage somebody that not 100% of us agree with, that's not part of this bill. So we're not requiring anybody to do anything specific, teach anything specific with regard to that. That's not where this bill goes. So when you ask that question, I think it's important to understand that. While we might include mental health and physical health under the umbrella of healthcare, we're not saying you have to teach A, B, and C, or this opinion or this behavior. I mean, I think all that is outside the scope of this bill. But, you know, if we're just limiting, you know, what this bill does and doesn't do, we want to recognize that it's including physical as well as mental health, but it's not saying what parts of those components. That's not what we want to get into and mandate it.
I'll ask final question.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you.